So this will be the final video on our baseball lines drawing. And in this video we're just going to talk about dimensioning and how to edit a dimension style. Also how to add some MLeaders or multi-leaders as annotation. So here's the kind of the finished product we're looking for, and it's okay if the style is not identical, but I do want to show you how to modify the dimension style. So let's start adding some dimensions now to our drawing. I'm going to go to the Annotate tab of the ribbon, and I'm going to start with just this basic dimension tool here, but notice it gives me a linear dimension as the default, and what I want is actually an aligned dimension. I want my dimension to align with whatever line I'm drawing. So let me give you an example of how these are different. If I select a linear dimension and go from third base to home plate, notice it's giving me a horizontal measure between these two items, and that's not what I want at all. I want a dimension along that baseline. So I'm going to select the aligned style, and then if I click on my two points here, I suppose I might have to extend these lines, so I'll actually use the fillet tool and specify a radius of 0, so that now I have a central meeting point. And now I can go back to my Annotate tab and select an aligned dimension. Now if I go from corner to corner or endpoint to endpoint on that line, it should give me the correct dimension, which is 60 units. And actually, if I look at the drawing, we need dimensions along these paths. So I'll add another one over here from endpoint to endpoint, 60 units. Now I understand this dimension, how it's showing up, is not exactly how I want it to be when I'm finished, right? We have too many decimal places showing, my arrows and texts are too large, and also I want to get rid of some of the extension beyond the arrow of this dimension line. But we'll change the style in a little bit. I'm just going to add all of the necessary dimensions to start. So again, going back into my align dimension, I want to show the distance between these two lines, and I'm going to move this to the opposite side. I also want to show a dimension between the base path and this inside of the infield. And I will notice I can grab this grip edit and drag the text around to wherever I want it, and we can move these again after we've edited the style. And I need one more dimension from the center of the pitcher's mound to home plate, 44 units, good. And now I need to start labeling some radii. So if I drop down on this drop-down menu here, notice radius is one of the options, and all I have to do is click on an arc and it labels the radius. So I'll put these well out of the way. And I know on my PDF drawing it says 18-foot diameter. Well, that's the same as a 9-foot radius. So I'll just leave this as a radius of 9 feet. Otherwise, I could use the diameter tool. But I don't really like this symbol for diameter. I think that's it's not really ambiguous, but you have to know what it means. R is a much more intuitive label for radius. So I'm going to just label the radii on these. I'll switch back to radius, and let's mark this radius also. And notice if I try to move my label around on this style, it's drawing the rest of the circle for me. So I'm going to put that in here for now. I have one more to label, which is the pitcher's mound, so R5. And I think we're getting pretty close as far as the dimensioning. The drawing itself does show this 2-foot square for the bags, and then for the batter's boxes we have this notation here, which I will add as an M leader or multi-leader. But let's clean up this dimensioning here first. And I can change all of these at once basically, and that is by editing the dimension style. So I can click on one dimension and right click and go to edit dimension style. And I know that it defaults as the standard style, so I need to highlight standard and then click modify, which brings up the modify dimension style standard window. So if I start all the way at the left, this is the line work, so that would be the dimension lines or extension lines. And I know I want my extensions beyond dimension lines to be 0, so I'm just going to change that to 0. I'm also going to change my offset from origin. I'm going to change that to 0. Or how about 0.02? We'll leave a little space. And what that is the space between this arrowed line and the text. Notice there's a little bit of a gap in there. So I think that's all we need to change on this tab. Let's go to symbols and arrows. Now for arrow size, I'm going to change that to 0.05 and see how that looks. And also for radius, it's adding this kind of plus symbol here when I label a radius, and I don't want to see anything there, so I'm going to leave center marks. I'm going to change that to none. And I think that's all we need to change on this tab. So let's go to text. Now I made my arrow size 0.05, so I want my text height to also be 0.05. And I think we can leave everything else on here for now. We can always come back and change it later if it doesn't work. I'm not going to change anything in the fit tab for now, but this would be if we wanted to have the arrows always be on the outside or text always on the inside. We'll leave this tab for now, but I will change on the primary units tab. I want my precision to be 0.0 or just 1 decimal place. I also want to show that these dimensions are going to be in feet, and I can do that by adding a suffix to all of my dimensions. I'm going to add an apostrophe, which denotes feet. So that will automatically say now on this dimension here, this 6.0000, when I change this style, it's going to be 6.0 feet. And let's see how that looks with all of those changes I just made. So I'll click OK and close. And look at what happens to all the dimensions. My text is smaller, my arrows are smaller, and everything looks pretty good. I just need to move some stuff around and clean up my drawing a little bit. So let's move this way back in. I can move this way back in. Looks like we don't need 2 of those, so I can delete 1. Put this back in the middle. Clean all of these up a little bit. So that's looking pretty good. Now right off the bat, I don't see too much that I really have to change. I can move this stuff around. I could make that that gap smaller if I wanted to by again clicking on the dimension, right clicking, going to edit dimension style, selecting standard and modify. And if I go to text, I can change the offset from dim line, make that a little smaller, 0.05, and OK, and close. And that did shorten up the gap a little bit, but I'm happy with the way this looks for now. So now let's add these multi-leaders right here where it says 2.5 by 5 that are 2 feet apart, and also this 2-foot square. So I will add a multi-leader. So I'm still on the Annotate tab, and I can go to multi-leader, and it's telling me in my command line specify leader arrowhead location. So where do I want my arrow? Well, I want my arrow to be right there because I'm talking about the dimension of a base. I want that to be 2.0 feet square. That's how I want my text to read. And when I click out of that box, it's going to shrink my text. So watch what happens. Notice my text got really small. So I'm going to have to select that and right click and go to Properties. And there are two things I want to change in my Properties tab. I want to change my arrowhead size. I'm going to make that a 2. Let's see how that looks. That looks pretty good. That looks roughly the same size as my dimension arrowheads. So I'll leave the arrows as 2, and my text I also want to be a size 2. And I want to get rid of the underline for this text. And I do that by changing this left and right attachment. So left attachment, if it attached to the left side of the dimension, is middle of top line. Right attachment, which is what we have, I'm going to change also to middle of top line. And that looks a lot better. And then I can simply move this over a little bit. And I'm going to add one more multi-leader for, again, looking at the command line, specify arrowhead location. I want my arrowhead to be right there, right at the midpoint of the batter's box. And then specify landing location, or where do I want my text. I can click, and I want this text to read 2.5 feet by 5.0 feet. And then I'll hit enter to give me a new line of text, and I want them to be 2.0 feet apart. And again, I need to change the arrow size and text size, so I clicked on it to highlight it, right click, properties, and then if I scroll down, I want my arrowhead size to be size 2, I want my text height to be size 2, and I need to change my attachment to be the middle of top line. So that looks pretty good as far as dimensioning. The only thing I really need to change now is the layers that this dimension is on. So if I go to my Home tab and open up my Layer Properties window, I'm going to create a new layer for my text, and I always start my new layers with an underscore, and I'll just call it text. And I want that to be a magenta color. So we've got this text layer as magenta. Now I can go through and select all of my dimensioning, and there's a neat trick for this. If I click on one of any type of object and right click, down at the bottom it says select similar, and that will highlight all of the similar objects in the drawing, and it highlights in this case all of the aligned dimensions that I created. And I can simply go up and move that to this text layer. Now I can do the same with my radial dimensions. I can click on one to highlight it, right click, and go to select similar, and again move them to my text layer. And lastly, these two multi-leader that I created, click on them and move them to my text layer. Now this says 2.5 by 5 feet, 2 feet apart, so that's really talking about both of these objects, right? It's talking about both batter's boxes. So I want to add another arrow to this text, and have it point at this other batter's box. Well, I can do that by going back to my Annotate tab and adding a leader. So I can click on Add Leader. Now it says Select MultiLeader. So I need to select this MultiLeader and look at what happens. It's going to let me put another arrow wherever I want and then escape to get out of that. So it was asking me to put yet a third arrow somewhere, and I simply hit escape to exit the command. And at this point, we have a pretty complete baseball diamond. So that's the end of the baseball lines tutorials. I hope these videos help.